This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Hey media, we need a rewrite. I'm Erin Trafford, and this is The Fourth Draft. Well, I bet you thought that I wasn't coming back. Hey, listen, so did I. I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to get this show back up and on the rails, but here we are. A little later than anticipated, but we are into season 2 of The Fourth Draft. And if you're brand new here, I'm Erin Trafford. I am a media strategist. I am the CEO at Story Studio Network. And despite the fact that my company produces hundreds and hundreds of podcast episodes a year, I have had trouble finding time in my busy entrepreneur, mom, having a life schedule, running a business to keep my own podcast on the rails. So be with me in celebrating the fact that I have been able to make this happen before the calendar year runs out. Now, we're not launching this until January 2025, but as I'm recording this, it is the second half of December 2024. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of snaps for getting this done. And before we jump into what I want to talk about, because there is so much to talk about this season with respect to media, with respect to the changing landscape, I got to be honest with you, I think more shifts happened in the last 12 months than even I anticipated were going to happen. And that's partly why I think it took me so long to get back on the mic, because before I'm able to comment on something, I want to try to step back and really take a keen observation of what is truly happening. And that took me a while. It took me a while. There were a lot of push and pull things happening with the business this year. There were a lot of push and pull things happening in my personal life this year. That just meant that I needed to really sink in and ground myself and before jumping in with you again to give you my analysis and to give you my thoughts. But here I am ready. I have lots to say, so pull me back and let me go. And I'm so happy that you are here for the ride. And listen, we're on a new feed. We're on the Fourth Draft RSS feed, but I know so many of you have actually hopped over after having been fans of Permission to Leap, which was my first podcast that I ran for my previous business when I was doing mainly digital content and entrepreneurship and that kind of a thing. So this show is an extension of that. In fact, I would almost hazard to say that the Fourth Draft is the evolution of Permission to Leap. So if you want to go back and listen to my evolution, go check out Permission to Leap, that feed. There are 68 episodes there. And that show kind of died a natural death when I sold that business and I transitioned to doing Story Studio Network full time. And so that's how the Fourth Draft came to be. But you're going to get the same, no holds barred analysis, personal reflections, anecdotes, thought leadership perspective, all of the things that you had on Permission to Leap. But right now we're going to look at it through a more elevated media lens, because here's one of the big things that I saw happen in 2024. We've been predicting for years and years and years that brands, organizations, personal brands were going to need to lean into becoming more fulsome in owning their media. 2024 sped that up, light speed. So whether you are an entrepreneur, whether you are a VP or in the C-suite at an organization, or maybe you're an executive director at a not-for-profit or something to that effect, all of what I'm going to share with you through this season of the Fourth Draft is going to resonate. All of it. This is not about, this is just for entrepreneurs, or this is just for major brands, or this is happening to everyone. Okay. So let's just talk a little bit about, I've called this episode, The Old Media Playbook is Dead. And I get that that's a little bit hyperbolic, but it was really my way to get into this conversation about refining our focus, about modernizing the way we're thinking about what we're putting out into the world. And I am doing this too. So this is a bit of self-reflection for me at this point, because I have had to modernize my communication. Listen, if you go back and look at what we put out on the 4th draft for season 1, it was like, what is a download? What counts as a listen? And oh my gosh, that is so rudimentary now. We don't even talk about that at Story Studio Network, like at all anymore. We have all evolved. We're being more focused on things that actually move the needle. So let's set the stage for this episode. First of all, let's just look at some new media principles, okay? And I'm going to start using some terms and things that you may or may not understand. And if you have questions, please feel free to drop me a comment on LinkedIn, find me and DM me, and so on. And we'll iterate this season as we go because we're all learning. So we're going to talk about some new media principles that you need to start considering in 2025 in order to modernize your media strategy. We're going to talk also today a little bit. I'm going to start seeding with you some key principles when it comes to audience engagement, because that metric has also shifted drastically over the last 12 months. And then I really want to end today's episode with a conversation about what I think is the most critical thing to start measuring, which is trust. It's hard to measure. It's hard to wrap our arms around. It's a bit pithy. It's a little bit nebulous, but it is critical. And this is critical for you no matter what. I'm going to say this again, no matter where you are in using content to drive your agenda, whether you're a not-for-profit, whether you're a solopreneur, you're a small company, it doesn't matter. I want you to hear me say this, that trust is your new measure of success. And by the way, podcasts are like top shelf when it comes to creating trust. This is the hill I will die on, folks. This is the hill I will die on. I run a podcast company. Yes, podcasts is not the only strategy I understand, but I am all in on podcasts with SSN because I know that trust is the thing we all need to learn how to reestablish, macro and micro. Okay, so let's start with point number 1, the death of the old media playbook and how we're going to start looking at modernizing what we're doing. And when I say old playbook, I don't mean like old from the 2000s. Like I'm not talking about SEO blasting and all of those things. I'm talking about like probably that strategic communications plan that your team developed in like 2022. That's how rapidly things have changed. If you're sitting on a comms and media plan that is more than 2 years old, we need to talk. I can help you. I can help you re-articulate it so that it is going to work more effectively and efficiently for you in 2025. Just 3 short years. So what was working in 2022? Let's talk about that. So first of all, audience behavior was very different. We were still, for the most part, isolated. I know that a lot of the lockdown had ended by then, but our behavior had not yet caught back up. So there were way more people online. There were way more people doing click to buy. Arguably, the economy was a little less, shall I say, fraught than it is right now. We hadn't seen the sustained rise in prices at the grocery stores and the home goods stores as we have seen now. So people weren't as stretched, arguably. Okay, so there were some really big macro things that were happening there that were changing the way that we approached our media. Also back then, things that were still working, doing live webinars, selling from the digital stage, quote unquote. I just had a conversation with a colleague, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and she was like, Erin, in 2021, I started this LinkedIn Live series and we would go live every Friday morning and it was great. And so many people came and we did it for like 48 weeks in a row. And I was really proud of myself. But then all of a sudden, 2 things happened. It stopped being fun and people stopped coming. And I was like, yeah, because that's a 2022 media playbook that worked then. But doing that solely now is not going to work for you. I had another conversation recently with a colleague, who is actually a brilliant business advisor. And he's probably one of the smartest people I know. And he said something, I think, off the cuff to me. And he's like, okay, so this is what I want to do. I want to just like plan out a podcast and jam out 100 episode ideas and sit in front of a camera and do 100 episodes. And then I want to throw it into a clip generator, and I want to generate, 3 clips per episode. And then we'll have 300 clips. And then we're going to have something to share for every single day of the year, more or less. And I was like, whoa, Nelly. That was the hustle and grind from 2022. I guarantee you 2 things will happen if you use that playbook in 2025. Number 1, you will be seen as noise. You will not be seen as thoughtful. People can see through that strategy now. They may not realize they can see through it, but they can. They'll know you sat in a room and pounded out a year's worth of content in one day. Nobody wants that. Why? Because if you do that in January and they're watching your content in November, they're going to know that that's not actually where you are in that moment. And what does that do? That erodes trust. Slowly, a grain of sand at a time. But that sandcastle, she's gonna come down, or the house of cards, or whatever analogy you want to use. That worked in 2022 when we were all on our phones all the time, and our key metric was more. Our key metric was be visible. Our key metric was climb to the top of that content mountain. Just keep doing the live streams and people will come and then people will buy. Just keep pumping out those 60, 90-second clips and people will think you're a thought leader and then they're going to buy from you. But listen to me. If you want to save your sanity, you don't have to make it that hard. It does not have to be that hard anymore. We don't have to create content that way anymore. The other thing that was happening in 2022, and I'll say this more for the brand organization sector-based kind of comms, is there was, it's a bit of a dichotomy. I think in the entrepreneurship space, there was this like push to do more, be visible, burn ourselves, so that it looked like we were always there. On the other side, there started to be some hesitancy in organizations, and particularly those involved in policy, public affairs, those kinds of things, to actually shrink a little bit, to shrink back, to go back to really old habits, like removing blogs from websites, like scaling back on social media, like only being on Twitter because that's where you believe the journalists are. How has that worked out for you now? And I say that with all the love in my heart, but if that was one of the boardroom decisions, was we're just going to go in on Twitter because our audience is the journalists and the journalists are all on Twitter. Wow. Okay. Here's a nugget. I'm going to divert for a second. Your audience is never the media. Okay. If you are crafting your comms plan for journalists, again, we need to talk. My call booking link is in the show notes. The media is not your audience. So if you made that strategic choice back in 2022, I'm going to lovingly suggest that you revisit that choice and really analyze how did that work for you? Because I guarantee you that that will not work for you going forward in 2025. You are going to need to make some very specific, defined, audience-based decisions for 2025. But doing that is going to make this all way more simple. Part of what my thesis is, to be honest, is that I actually think comms and media are going to get simpler in 2025. You're going to be able to make faster, better choices. And it all comes back to what I originally said, because we're going to leave behind this requirement to be everywhere. That's what's going to cease to be in terms of the strategy. Okay, we're going to get into more of this then down the line. And I've got some episodes planned where I want to talk about very specific strategies. So all of this is actually leading us to a few things I want to start seeding for you in terms of what are the new principles. If back then the principle was be where the journalists are, be everywhere, pump out as much as you can, create efficiencies in your system, you're kind of trying to game the system. We're moving back to more human-based core principles for modern comms. Okay. And I know that this word is probably overused and it's like, oh, what does this even mean? It's like a buzzword that's gone beyond being a buzzword. But I truly think that we're going to move to a new form of authenticity. And that's what I mean about like, don't create content in January that you're going to put out in November. You can plan it, but please don't just schedule it all. Please don't, because it loses its authenticity. And when you lose your authenticity, you truly, truly do lose that trust factor. And once you lose trust, it's like impossible to get it back. So the other principle that leads out of that I think that is going to lead in 2025 is this concept of adaptability. We're not going to be so rigid in our plans. When I work with clients on their media strategy, we sit down and we work through what I call an if-then. We build your if-then. If this happens, then this lever gets pulled in your communications and your media. And we set you up for success with respect to all of the potential levers that you're going to have in front of you. But you need to be ready to be adaptable. If one channel starts really taking off and you build an incredible community there, then this other assumption that we had can very easily and guilt-free be released. I bet you thought that I was going to say, if this works, then do more. No, because that leads to the third principle. The third thing that I think is going to lead the way in terms of communications and media strategy for 2025, which is audience first thinking. Remember back when I said, if you were on Twitter because the journalists were on Twitter, the flaw in that thought process, the flaw in that strategy is that your audience is not the journalist. Your audience is the journalist's audience. And by being adaptable and authentic and very strategic in how your new media comms plan is built, you are going to be able to shorten the distance between you and that audience regardless of the journalist. And I say this as a broadcaster and as a journalist. The definition of earned media is going to fundamentally change if it hasn't already. And so you are going to need to make better decisions about where you're going to be in order to shorten the distance between you and your intended audience, whether that's a policymaker, whether that's a politician, whether that's a stakeholder, whether that's a voter, whether that's a consumer, whether that's simply somebody who you need to educate about a bigger issue in order for them to understand it better such that they can advocate for you. And we're going to talk about this concept of advocacy this season as well, because this is going to apply. This is going to be humongous in 2025. Okay, so we're looking at ways now to ensure that that comm strategy, that media plan, I'm not even going to call it a comm strategy. I'm going to call it a media plan, because media can encompass your social media. It can encompass your earned media, and it certainly involves your owned media. Authenticity, adaptability, and audience first. That is what you're going to be looking for in 2025. No longer efficient, hustle, rigid, highly planned, highly orchestrated, journalist first. It's not going to work. You're going to think it's working until you realize you're burnt out and that you don't have any really solid success metrics to look at, which leads me to the last thing I want to talk about, which is trust. And we're going to talk about this a lot this season. So make sure you subscribe to the show and, leave comments and drop me DMs on LinkedIn with your ideas, because I'm willing to be adaptable in how we approach learning this together. But I want you to start thinking about some really tangible ways that you can start to measure trust with your audience. And it might start with you asking your team or yourself or whoever you're working with, what metrics do we have currently? What are we currently measuring? And is there any way to qualitatively and quantitatively turn that into a metric of trust? This is one of the reasons why I love podcasting so much, because there is actually a very clear metric of trust attached to podcasting, and it's time spent listening. The longer you choose as a listener to spend with somebody speaking in your ear, stands to reason, the more you trust them, the more you like them, the more you want to be around them, the more you're willing to listen to them again, the more you're willing to share that message with somebody else. Time spent listening, attention is the new metric of trust. And in a world where, in the last year, we have seen trust in mainstream media fall off a cliff for a multitude of reasons. It is a quagmire out there, folks. Trust is the one thing you should now be chasing. You should be coveting it like a gold nugget. Trust with your key demographic. And let everything else be noise. Let it all be noise. And this comes back to what I said. I think that if this is what you focus on, this North Star for 2025, your media plan will simplify. We're going to be able to move forward feeling way less frantic and not playing this game on hard all the time. But if there's one thing that you take away today, I want you to hear that plan from 2022, just put it down, read through it, take from it what you felt good about, and let's have a real conversation about how you need to reevaluate that plan for 2025. Hey, listen, thanks for coming back in, checking out the show, season 2. I know it's been a while, but we're going to try to do this again because I've got a lot to say, and now I have the space to say it. So, thanks for listening. I'm Erin Trafford. As I've mentioned throughout the episode, you can find all the details about how to get in contact with me, about Story Studio Network in the show notes. Find me on LinkedIn, Erin Trafford. I will accept your connection request. We can chat in the DMs, whatever works for you. And I do want to let you know that in 2025, I am taking a handful, and when I say a handful, I mean only a handful of media strategy clients who I will personally work with you and your organization in 2025. This is on top of the work that we do at Story Studio Network. So if you're at all interested in having that conversation, and it's just a conversation, folks, that's it. That's it. It's like coffee and a donut. We can absolutely have that conversation and see what you need. See what you need, because I am here to help you simplify and have success and trust. All right, in the next episode, what are we talking about? What are we going to talk about? Oh, we're going to talk more about trust. What to do if you look at your media now and you're like, oh gosh, we don't know if they trust us. What to do if they don't trust you? Can you fix it? We'll see you back here in like a week, maybe less.
SSN.
We know podcasts.
Find us at storystudionetwork.com.